Today, I want to look at Malachi chapter 1. Malachi is an incredible but also heartbreaking book. In this book, the Lord brings 5 different disputations or disputes to the people. And there's this back and forth dialogue where God says, "You guys say this about me." And then he answers for the people. And there's this back and forth between all these disputes that God has with his people. Today, we're going to look at the second one. The first one, it's a terrible passage that describes how Israel said to God, "You don't love us." I mean, that is absurd. Of all the nations to be able to say that, Israel would be at the very bottom of the list. And God proves his love with them by getting to the heart of the issue and giving some examples and illustrations as well. Today we're going to look at the second dispute that God has with his people. And Malachi will be moderating it for us, if you will. And this dispute is all about wrong worship, or worship in the wrong way. And really the whole point of this passage is that wrong worship is worthless worship. We're going to identify 2 aspects of wrong worship today. And the first one is that worship can be done in the wrong way. Now, if you look in the first part of Malachi chapter 1, verse 6, the priests are offering perverted sacrifices. They're offering less than required. The Mosaic law had very clear standards for what the priests needed to offer to God. And very clear. It's almost impossible to not understand what the law is asking for. And the priest's problem wasn't that they didn't understand it. They most certainly did. It's just that they didn't do it. They didn't care what it said. And so they offered less than what was required. They would take this lame or sickly lamb and they would offer it to God. And there's an illustration here. It would be almost as if the president or any government official, for that matter, comes over to your house. And then you start preparing a meal for the president. You go out, you find the nicest steak that you can possibly buy. You get some potatoes and other sides to go with it. You're marinating the steak. You're seasoning all the accoutrements. You even have a nice appetizer, some fancy cheeses. You've got the whole kit and caboodle. But you're only preparing 1 serving of this meal. And about 3/4 of the way through this preparation for the meal, you turn and you look at the president with this look of almost shock. Like, "Oh, I forgot that you were here." And so very quickly you go out to the freezer and you find the finest frozen tofu that you have. And you stick it in the microwave for about 30 seconds. And you pull your steak off the grill, pull that that baked potato out of the oven, and you set the steak and potato on your plate, and you hand the still half-frozen tofu to the president. That is essentially what the priests were doing here. They were taking these lambs and these sacrifices, taking the best portions of the sacrifice for themselves, and then giving God the leftovers. They were worshiping in the wrong way. They were offering less than was expected, and it was dishonoring God. But there's another way that you can dishonor God as well, and that's with not just by worshiping, by not offering what is required, but also by worshiping with the wrong attitude. So we've already talked about how the priests are cutting corners, offering sick lambs, taking most of the sacrifice for themselves. But on top of that, they say, God, doing this it's kind of hard. It's too hard, to be honest. And this is what they say. Is it not evil? This isn't evil. What we're doing? No. This is not evil. It's fine. Offering with this wrong attitude, saying, oh, this is too hard. They're saying, no, that's not evil. That's perfectly fine. And it's in verses 11 through 14 where they're saying this. You profane my altar, my table, and it's defiled. You say, oh, what a weariness this is. It's so tiresome to serve the Lord. And they have this terrible attitude that is displeasing the Lord. And this all goes back to their view of God. They view God almost like a slot machine. Pull the lever and hope you can cash out. We already talked about how they're taking most of the sacrifice for themselves, so this is like playing a slot machine, but you're not even putting a quarter in. You're just yanking that lever and you're saying, come on, give me something good. They're treating God like a good luck charm because simply they don't fear him. They view him as nothing more than a good luck charm, doing the bare minimum to use God for what he can give them. God is a broken slot machine, according to these priests. And because of that, they worship in the wrong way, doing less than is required. And then they also worship with a terrible attitude. So here's the application question. How are you worshiping God? Does your worship show that you are doing the bare minimum requirement? Does your worship have your heart saying, man, this whole serving God thing is too hard, it's not worth it? And then here would be the follow-up question. If that is the case, if your heart is saying that, well, what are you going to do to increase your fear of God so that you are willing to do not just the minimum and not worship with the wrong attitude, but to worship joyfully with your whole heart? What are you going to do? And this is what I would suggest. Over this next week, choose an attribute of God each day and tell a friend about that attribute of God. Glory in it, revel in it. Man, I cannot believe God is so loving. Examine God's love. Compare your love to God's love and say, ooh, I am not as loving as God. Not even close. I want to be like that. But Lord, thank you that you are so loving. The next day, maybe go for his holiness. And for 7 days, do this. Look at God's holiness, his love, all these attributes. Revel in them. Compare yourself to them. See how short you come up to them. And tell someone about it. To increase your fear of God. Because when you have the fear of God, your worship will not be worthless. You won't be worshiping with a bad attitude or doing less than what is required. You will be worshiping God with your whole heart.